Heraclitus, circa 500 BC. Heraclitus was from Ephesus on the Anatolian Peninsula in modern-day Turkey. He was one of its leading citizens, but perhaps one of the most significant things that we know about the life of Heraclitus is that he voluntarily retired from public life and renounced Ephesus. As for why this happened, it is at least superficially a political dispute, but in truth Heraclitus had a more profound and damning critique of the Ephesians as people. Because of the location of their city-state, the Ephesians had to cautiously manage their relationship to the Persians. Nietzsche tells us that while he was in public life, Heraclitus was, quote, a merciless opponent of democratic parties, end quote. Among the Democrats in Ephesus, there were radical elements who wished to pursue a more aggressive posture to antagonize the Persians. Nietzsche writes, and this isn't in Philosophy in the Tragic Age of the Greeks, but he includes this detail in his Pre-Platonic lecture notes, quote, Heraclitus, like his friend Hermodorus, had probably counseled against reckless measures against the Persians, and both were decried as friends of the Persians, until Hermodorus was ostracized. Heraclitus left the city voluntarily, giving up his archonship. He subsequently resided in seclusion at the Temple of Artemis. End quote. Heraclitus lived, if not in total solitude, apart from the rest of society. He could sometimes be found playing knucklebones with the children. In one famous anecdote, some of the other leading Ephesians came to see him at the temple. As they gathered around him and stared in disbelief, he said, quote, Why, you rascals, are you astonished? Is it not better to do this than to take part in your civic life? End quote. Another detail that Nietzsche gets from Diogenes Laertius is something that Heraclitus said of his banishment. Quote, The Ephesians would do well to end their lives, every grown man of them, and leave the city to beardless boys. For that they have driven out Hermodorus, the worthiest man among them, saying, We will have none who is worthiest among us, or if there be any such, let him go elsewhere and consort with others. End quote. This is the result of the Greek practice of ostracism, in which every year the polis would vote on some individual to banish. Nietzsche suggests in the essay Homer's Contest that they did this not out of fear of tyrants or out of spite, because even though such things certainly happened in the long history of the practice, this was not the original purpose or motivation behind ostracism. The point was to continue the agon, the social competition. If there was ever any individual that was too outstanding, that completely dominated in some way, a rhapsode so good that none of the other rhapsodes could even hold a candle to their performances, for example, the competition then for who would be the best rhapsode would stall out. So it's best to banish that person in order to continue the social contest. The result of this, however, is that over time the most ambitious, most accomplished people found themselves banished. Heraclitus sees the folly in this. He eventually sees the folly in the entirety of public life and the power games of politics. He perceives that those who are the best in any society will find themselves expelled or else hammered down by the swarm of mediocre people. This assessment of the way that the collective acts is influential on Nietzsche's thought. Heraclitus is so disgusted with this state of affairs that the opinion that would rise to ascendance over the minds of the majority would be that the polis ought to be more aggressive and reckless in their foreign policy, and that this opinion not only just wins out, but that they would then banish the rational, cool-headed people. Heraclitus is so repulsed by this that he simply banishes himself. This backstory is essential for understanding Heraclitus and his whole character, which fascinated Nietzsche almost as much as the Heraclitean philosophy. Heraclitus is regal and self-assured to the maximum degree. We might call it arrogance. He is solitary because, in all other men, he sees only childishness and error. Only within himself does he find the truth, and he speaks directly from his own intuitive certainty. He does not feel a dialectical responsibility to justify his philosophy to the many by means of logical persuasion. And he does not approach philosophy, as Thales or Anaximander did, as a scientific thinker. This is the power of Heraclitus's archetype, and his thought is directly tied to his being this unique type of person, standing aside from any sort of discipline or lineage of thinkers. Nietzsche writes in Philosophy in the Tragic Age of the Greeks, section 8, quote, "Heraclitus was proud, and if it comes to pride with a philosopher, then it is a great pride. His work never refers him to a public, the applause of the masses, and the hailing chorus of contemporaries. To wander lonely along his path belongs to the nature of the philosopher. His talents are the rarest, in a certain sense the most unnatural, and at the same time exclusive and hostile even toward kindred talents. The wall of his self-sufficiency must be of diamond, if it is not to be demolished and broken, for everything is in motion against him. His journey to immortality is more cumbersome and impeded than any other, and yet nobody can believe more firmly than the philosopher that he will attain the goal by that journey, because he does not know where he is to stand, if not on the widely spread wings of all time. For the disregard of everything present and momentary lies in the essence of the great philosophic nature. He has truth. The wheel of time may roll whither it pleases, never can it escape from truth. It is important to hear that such men have lived. Such men live in their own solar system. One has to look for them there. Of that feeling of solitude which permeated the Ephesian recluse of the Artemis temple, one can only divine something when growing benumbed in the wildest mountain desert. No paramount feeling of compassionate agitation, no desire to help, heal, and save emanates from him. He is a star without an atmosphere. His eye, directed blazingly inwards, looks outward for appearance's sake only, extinct and icy. All around him, immediately upon the citadel of his pride, beat the waves of folly and perversity. With loathing, he turns away from them. But men with a feeling heart would also shun such a Gorgon monster as cast out of brass. Within an out-of-the-way sanctuary among the statues of gods, by the side of cold, composedly sublime architecture, such a being may appear more comprehensible. As a man among men, Heraclitus was incredible, and though he was seen paying attention to the play of noisy children, even then he was reflecting upon what man never thought of on such an occasion: the play of the great world-child Zeus. He had no need of men, not even for his discernments. He was not interested in all that which one might perhaps ascertain from them, and in what other sages before him had been endeavoring to ascertain. He spoke with disdain of such questioning, collecting, in short, historic men. "I sought and investigated myself," he said, with a word by which one designates the investigation of an oracle, as if he and no one else were the true fulfiller and achiever of the Delphic precept, "Know thyself." End quote. That is a beautiful section of Nietzschean prose, and I think it's a confession from Nietzsche of just how thoroughly he was indebted to this man. This is where Nietzsche found the highest archetype of the philosopher from his perspective. Out of all of these figures, Heraclitus is the archetype with whom Nietzsche identifies, the solitary thinker who seeks and investigates himself, who understands their own reason to be the final and ultimate authority. Perhaps with Heraclitus this is taken to an extreme that may be imprudent. You end up setting yourself at odds with everyone in society around you. You see no relevant wisdom in those around you whatsoever. This could be seen as one of the benefits of these single-minded sages. In being sculpted out of a single stone, they each become a sort of maximum, a limit case for a certain type of thought. In Heraclitus, we find something admirable, something desirable to emulate, and that he creates that diamond wall of self-sufficiency. Remember that great task of Ralph Waldo Emerson, for example, self-reliance. Heraclitus exhibits that same virtue. And for those of us who feel as though we are inhabiting a world ruled by childishness and folly, that sense of relying on one's self and trusting in one's own wisdom and one's own intuition as the final authority, that can be immensely valuable. even though, admittedly, it is a dangerous path. It leaves you open to falling into error yourself, in which there will not be a corrective from the external world. Trust in yourself is both a wonderful thing and a dangerous thing. Now that we have established who Heraclitus is, we might return to the lingering question in the wake of Anaximander's philosophical project, and that is, why is there becoming instead of being? If becoming is a kind of punishment for stealing our existence from the indefinite, an injustice which will be settled by reabsorption into the infinite, why hasn't everything been reabsorbed? Why hasn't becoming long since come to an end? Why this endless river of becoming? Nietzsche explains how Heraclitus addresses this. Quote, Heraclitus denied the duality of two quite diverse worlds. End quote. These two diverse worlds to which Nietzsche refers are being and becoming, or we might say the Kantian distinction of noumenon and phenomena, thing in itself and appearance, or to use Anaximandrian language, the world of the indefinite and the world of definite things. Nietzsche continues in the passage, quote, he no longer distinguished a physical world from a metaphysical, a realm of definite qualities from a realm of indefinable indefiniteness. Now, after this first step, he could neither be kept back any longer from a still greater audacity of denying. He denied being altogether. For this one world which was left to him, shielded all round by eternal unwritten laws, flowing up and down in the brazen beat of rhythm, shows nowhere persistence, indestructibility, a bulwark in the stream. Louder than Anaximander, Heraclitus exclaimed, I see nothing but becoming. Be not deceived. It is the fault of your limited outlook, and not the fault of the essence of things, if you believe that you see firm land anywhere in the ocean of becoming and passing. You need names for things, just as if they had a rigid permanence, but the very river in which you bathe a second time is no longer the same one which you entered before. End quote. That last sentence, of course, refers to one of the most famous of Heraclitus's aphorisms, one does not step into the same river twice, suggesting something very profound. The river is not something that possesses being. The whole thought model of being would suggest that there is a sort of essence to the river, a river in itself, which exists independently of the phenomenal experience of the river, and in spite of whatever changes, momentary changes or transitoriness may exist in the expression or the phenomenal existence of the river, there's a sort of quote-unquote real thing there. There's some sort of river that actually exists, which is a definable thing with boundaries and limits that we can sort of grab onto with our perception and with our language. That there is a identity to the river. The trouble with positing such an essential identity to the river is the very fact that the river flows, it moves. The water that makes up the river is never the same from moment to moment. If it were the same water every moment, then it wouldn't be flowing, meaning it would not be a river. You can't ever break down the river into constituent parts and determine where the river starts and ends. Rivers shift and move over the course of centuries, decades even. Even though we think of the river as a thing, the river is simply the result of, for example, snowmelt from the mountains flowing downhill. The river is a happening rather than a thing. It's an event or a process rather than an essence. This is the sense in which Heraclitus rejects all being. He sees only becoming, only events, not things. These phenomena that arise and pass away have no underlying essence or identity to anchor them. So the reason why this river of becoming continues is because existence is not an injustice that must be rectified. There is no being, no limitless aberon from which our existence was stolen. Our particular existence, our phenomenal existence, is in fact not even a reality that we can point to. It's just an event or a process. It's not as if we're a thing that carved itself off from being. The notion of the aperon, the indefinite, the qualityless, indestructible being, is nothing more than a fiction, an error created by men of little discernment. There's no end to becoming because there's no beginning to becoming. The river of existence simply flows on endlessly. Accordingly, Heraclitus likens existence to fire, in a sense perhaps more profound than Thales' assertion that all matter is a transformation of water. We might think of fire as something more akin to energy in our modern lexicon, and perhaps fire was the only example that Heraclitus had at hand to describe energy. There's some of that artfulness here, some of that poetry that constitutes the leap of the pre-Platonic philosopher. Fire comes into being and then disappears from being, while the wood or the fuel that one uses for fire clearly still exists. It transforms into something else. It becomes ashes, for example. The actual flame seems to just appear and then disappear, to be there one moment and then gone the next. It's a real-life demonstration of a rising and passing away, of coming into being and then blinking out of being. Meanwhile, fire also dances around. It seems to flow, to leap, to swell, to dissolve. It's a bit unpredictable. It can be both destructive and creative, useful and catastrophic. It has all these elements that make it ideal as the allegory for what Heraclitus thinks the world is, which he puts forth famously in Fragment 30. Quote, "This universe, which is the same for all, has not been made by any god or man, but it has always been, is, and will be an ever-living fire, kindling itself by regular measures and going out by regular measures." End quote. So, this world of transitory existence has always been, is, and will be, which means transitory existence is eternal. That which is indestructible is the world, this totality of becoming itself, we might say. This existence that's defined by arising and passing away. It's not that there is something in itself which is eternal. What we ascribe that eternal status to in Heraclitean philosophy is becoming itself, which means change itself. If the question from the beginning has been what is, and we have proceeded by asking about the fundamental nature of matter, then about the origin of the different forms of matter, Heraclitus' answer is that what is this changeable existence. The answer is not found in some truth which is quote-unquote behind the world. Thales argued that out of the one came the many, out of one substance comes many different forms of existence. Heraclitus argues, quote, "The one is the many," end quote. The identity of becoming, the essence or self-existence of becoming, is the fact that becoming is multiple. Change, movement, these concepts suggest or demand multiplicity. You could never have movement in an existence that consisted of a purely static, unchangeable being. And since Heraclitus denies this sort of being, the only suggestion of such an identity to all things is that they are governed by what Heraclitus calls logos, a law or reason, which we might consider something akin to what we would call the laws of nature. That if anything enduring exists, that law is what exists, and the character of that law is change. What is enduring is change. This Heraclitean view produces a very different conception of justice in relation to life and existence than the view of Anaximander. Anaximander says that it is on account of injustice that our lives consist of strife. And the Heraclitean view, quote, "Strife is justice," end quote. There is nothing inherently terrible about strife that makes it self-evidently a punishment against living things. In fact, since this living phenomenal existence is the very fabric of being, since becoming is being, that means that strife is part of the nature of that being, part of the logos that governs it. This is how Heraclitus arrives at the harsh notion that, quote, "War is the father of all," end quote, because there is no higher authority or transcendental form of being which governs the phenomenal world. Rather, that the world is governed by laws which are internal to it, not imposed from above. Heraclitus sees that conflict is the natural pattern that apprehends in the world. The world is a play of forces, sometimes a dance, sometimes a battle. There's a creative aspect to this play, there's a destructive aspect to it, but it is play, something innocent, something which is not condemned by the strife that takes place within it. The metaphor that he uses is that of children playing. Fragment 52, quote, "Time is a child playing draughts. The kingly power is a child's," end quote. The spirit of the world is like the boy god Aeon, god of the zodiac, who plays innocently. This is not a theodicy. It's not a justification of the evil in the world, as we might say Anaximander engaged in. Rather, it's the refusal to justify the world at all. It's all just a game. Whatever pleasure or pain, sorrow or joy existed within the roil of that ever-living fire, it was not created to fulfill a somber morality tale. It simply happened. If we were to say that there is a divinity moving the world, we would say that this divinity did it all for fun, and that's that. Nietzsche writes in section 7, quote, "Heraclitus is not compelled to prove, as Leibniz was, that this world was even the best of all. It was sufficient for him that the world is the beautiful, innocent play of the aeon. Man, on the whole, is to him even an irrational being, with which the fact that in all his essence the law of all-ruling reason is fulfilled does not clash. He does not occupy a specially favored position in nature, whose highest phenomenon is not simple-minded man, but fire, for instance, as stars. Insofar as man has through necessity received a share of fire, he is a little more rational. As far as he consists of earth and water, it stands badly within his reason. He is not compelled to take cognizance of the Logos simply because he is a human being. Why is there water? Why earth? This, to Heraclitus, is a much more serious problem than to ask why men are so stupid and bad. In the highest and the most perverted men, the same inherent lawfulness and justice manifest themselves. If, however, one would ask Heraclitus the question, why is fire not always fire? Why is it now water, now earth? Then he would only just answer, it is a game. Don't take it too seriously, and still less, morally. Heraclitus describes only the existing world and has the same contemplative pleasure in it which the artist experiences when looking at his growing work. Only those who have cause to be disconcerted with his natural history of man find him gloomy, melancholy, tearful, somber, atrabilious, pessimistic, and altogether hateful. He, however, would take these discontented people, together with their antipathies and sympathies, their hatred and their love, as negligible, and perhaps answer them with some such comment as, quote, "Dogs bark at anything they do not know," or, quote, "To the ass, chaff is preferable to gold," end quote. Those last two remarks that Nietzsche cites are among Heraclitus's most quotable aphorisms, and they indicate that from a given perspective, a phenomena could be experienced differently than it might be from the perspective of another type of being. A dog barks at anyone they don't know, meaning if a person walks into a room, even if the dog can't see the person, the dog can smell them, right? The dog will react differently depending on whether they smell a familiar person or a total stranger. Or the donkey prefers straw to gold. Presumably, human beings would prefer gold to straw because we use gold in our economic system. Gold can buy you quite a bit of straw as well as other things that you might want. But there's no inherent value to gold that makes it better than straw. Its value is given to it by human beings. It has no value at all to the donkey, who would prefer the straw that it can actually eat. This is, in roughly 500 BC, a perspectivist approach to philosophy. Heraclitus is saying, you invest phenomena with the values that they have. Things have the sense and value that they have based on who and what you are, not based on some quality inherent to the object. The object is not valuable in and of itself. Gold is not valuable in and of itself. If a dog barks at one person and not another, it's not because the first person was bad and the second person was good. It just means the dog knows one person and he doesn't know the other person. He has an association with one, but not the other. This may seem like a minor or even an obvious point, but this is the real consequence of denying being. There are no inherent qualities to things, only what we give them. This even applies to the way we sense the thing and experience it, because sensation itself occurs at the intersection of the object with our sense organs. It depends on our sense organs such that we're able to represent the object to ourselves. These insights would be profoundly important to countless philosophers of the continental tradition and afterwards, from Hegel to Nietzsche to Deleuze to Heidegger. All in all, Heraclitus leaves us with a world which is the game of Aeon or Zeus, however we want to name the supreme deity. It's a perspective on life which makes primary the embodied living world. Of all the Pre-Platonics, Nietzsche seems to see the greatest enduring value in Heraclitus. Nietzsche writes, quote, "The world needs truth eternally. Therefore she needs also Heraclitus eternally, although he has no need of her. What does his fame matter to him? Fame with mortals ever flowing on," as he exclaims scornfully. His fame is of concern to man, not to himself. The immortality of mankind needs him, not he the immortality of the man Heraclitus. That which he beheld, the doctrine of the law and the becoming, and of the play in the necessity, must henceforth be beheld eternally. He has raised the curtain of this greatest stage play. End quote. Of course, the philosophical dialogue of the Pre-Platonics is far from over. Having seemingly eliminated static being from the discourse with his philosophy of becoming, Heraclitus was destined to remain an obscure figure. It is simply not the kind of assertion that the ordinary people with their lack of discernment will be able to believe in. And meanwhile, another philosopher, with whom he was a contemporary, a man from Elea, began an entire school in which being would return with a vengeance. If you enjoyed the Nietzsche podcast or found it helpful, you can visit us and support the show at patreon.com/untimelyreflections. The link is in the description. Or just share the show with any of your friends that you think might enjoy it or on social media. Thank you for your support.